The last page has been turned on my most recent read. However, that's not what you're here to listen to this week. January has been a month for me of special author interviews, and today I am going to be talking with Lisa Carter about her debut novel, Six Poppies, which will have you crying the moment you start reading it because it is a beautiful but heartbreaking story. So instead of hearing me talk about everything for an eternity, I'm going to pass things over to me and Lisa talking back at the beginning of December 2024. And I am really happy to say I am joined today by Lisa Carter, who previously worked on the Daily Mail as well as many other newspapers of note in the UK. And she's here to talk about Six Poppies, her brand new novel, which comes out on the 30th of January 2025. I can't believe we're talking 2025 already. I don't know where this year has gone, and I'm kind of scared that next year is so close. Thank you so much for joining me today to talk about this, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honour.
I absolutely loved this book and I read it really quickly. In fact, I took it to bed and I think I finished it around 1:30 in the morning because I really couldn't put it down. I wanted to find out what happened to all the characters. And it is a trauma inducing book in many ways, but I think it's good because it brings about awareness of mental health issues that are suffered by soldiers and those who live with them. So, do you want to tell us about Six Poppies before we get into talking about the book itself?
Absolutely. So, Six Poppies is the story of a soldier who heads to Afghanistan, where he meets a nurse and they instantly have feelings for one another. But then he learns that the nurse is the girlfriend of one of his fellow soldiers, so backs away. And then years later, when he returns to the UK, they meet again. And it's the story of whether or not they eventually managed to get together. And then interlaced throughout that is the story of the Six Poppies. And the Six Poppies are about a tattoo he has on his back. Each poppy is for a person he lost in Afghanistan. So that as the story goes on, it's sort of who the tale of the people that he lost out there.
Yeah, those stories were the bits that really tug at the heartstrings because obviously you get to know, if I remember, the book starts with him meeting Sarah, who is the nurse in this instance, and his name is Carl. And
That's
you
right.
have that, it's the start, and it's the moment that they have a photo taken together where they're all happy and everything else. And slowly, as his story goes on with the Six Poppies, he is telling of the moment that he lost the people he is having the poppy done for.
That's right.
I think Caroline's was the worst one. Caroline's was definitely the worst one. She was obviously she was a nurse. She was engaged to Jobbo,
Yep, yep.
and she was a friend of Sarah's as well.
Yes, Caroline wasn't a nurse. She was a soldier out there, but looking after dogs on the
Oh
compound,
yes, of
and also
course.
yes, a good friend. That's right.
Yeah, that moment I think was the worst for me.
Oh,
Reading her story was the saddest, but then also reading about Asami who suffered the fate I've read so many articles where and seen a lot of TV shows where they've had the translator, the interpreter, the guide be told, "Oh, we can't do anything for you. You got paid for this." And you sit it's happened so many times in TV shows and you've read about it in articles. So the fact that Asami suffered this fate and
I think that you exactly as you say, you've read about it, and it all of these things came from true transcripts. So not just one interpreter, but all of those things did happen to interpreters out there, and you can't help but feel that we did treat them very badly, and certainly the soldiers felt that. And so I did want to cast a light on that because they were their friends, they were one of them, and then exactly that, we didn't help them in the end.
yeah, which that was something that hit home It was that was the worst kind of betrayal.
I
Oh,
think it was.
you've helped us, you've done this, you've put your life at risk, not only your life, but the life of your family, your loved ones. And oh, yeah, let's not do anything about it. Really
And they
sorry.
were so trusting. They were so
Yeah.
trusting in the British government and the British soldiers. You know, they knew that they were at risk. They knew their families were at risk, but they did it anyway because they wanted a better world for their families and for Afghanistan. And then we just didn't help them when, when the time came.
You mentioned transcripts, so I'm guessing there was a lot of research that went into this. I know at the end of the book you mentioned Rob French, who was a soldier in Afghanistan, and obviously a lot of this was inspired by something you'd read about him, and then you spoke with him.
Mm.
I'm guessing several times. So how much research did you actually do to write this book? Because there was so much detail in there.
A lot of research. Although almost as a sort of book nerdy child, that was my comfort zone to kind of just retreat. So I saw this newspaper article on Rob. It was Remembrance Day 2017, and this an extraordinary photograph of a man with a tattoo on his back of 7 poppies. And of all the stories I've covered, of all the years, countless Remembrance Day stories, but this really stuck with me. And so much so that I tracked him down and I did think, oh, maybe there is a story in Rob and what happened to him. And I met him eventually, and he was just the most extraordinary man that had been through these terrible things. And for one reason or another, it felt like his story wasn't mine to tell, and the stories of the men on his back certainly weren't mine to tell. But I had this wonderful moment where I thought maybe, I could base something on him. And that's when I did go away and I did do loads of research and I read endless soldiers' blogs and endless newspaper articles. So there was this wealth of information out there, and piecing together bits of those into the book actually made it much almost easier because I wasn't making it up. There was this information out there for me to mine, although heartbreaking and sort of so upsetting, some of it to read. But it felt like something I wanted to get out there because, as you mentioned early on, you do think of these soldiers that go out there and the ones that come back, they come back, but I don't think they're the men that went out there. And so for the wives and the mothers and the children back home, it's a different person that they're dealing with. And I hope that the book touches on that. And that was something that I did take Rob's lead from, that, they come back and life is just so tough. They suffer so much from post-traumatic stress. And I really wanted to get that message out there because a lot of what we see is gung-ho and soldiers out there having a great time. And early on in the book, as you mentioned, when they meet, there is this sense of that absolute camaraderie, and then they all go through so much and they all change inevitably by what happens.
That's the thing. I think that obviously because we're seeing the majority of this book through Carl's eyes, and he seems, though there's obviously this underlying, he's regretful, he's obviously very, very sad. He lost his best friend and he feels hugely responsible. And obviously his best friend's wife doesn't reduce that self in sort of self-facing anger,
Yeah,
because she does blame him for the fact that her husband Fridge went out there because he'd made it sound like such a jolly. I don't
yeah,
see that he made it sound like such a jolly, but I don't think anybody could make this sound like such a jolly. Obviously, they're very, very close. The entire group is bonded by their joint experiences.
yeah,
But then you have Carl, who seems to have things together or seems to be pulling things together. He's getting his life straight. He's got his dog walking business. He's made friends in Roz and Maggie, both of whom are fantastic. But there's still that underlying pain and feelings of inadequacy, maybe.
I think exactly that. And again, this was something I took from Rob, that he said to me that when he came back, and from the outsider looking in, it feels as if or it seems as if you've got your life together, but it would take a tiny thing for him to be straight back there. And the anecdote that I remember from him was he'd taken his little boys to the zoo, and he was in the tunnel to go down to see somebody, and in that second he was literally back in Afghanistan. He could smell it. It was the heat of Afghanistan. So exactly that, it seems that you're getting back on with your life. And I think for some that even do recover very well, there are always moments of it, and then for others they just never really do recover. There's, the moments get bigger and bigger, and it's just impossible for them to leave behind what happened over there.
Like Danny.
Exactly, exactly.
I mean, Danny and Sarah's relationship is heartbreaking in so many ways because they seem to have things together when they're in Afghanistan, even though obviously her and Carl have had this moment, this instant connection thing. And it's like the cliched meet cute, but in far harsher circumstances. And then she goes back to England with him
Mm,
and tries to make things work when he's no longer anything like the person she knew. And he's been
absolutely.
changed so much that she's terrified of him.
Completely terrified of him, and with reason. As many of these soldiers, they turn to drink because they don't know how to cope, they don't know how to ask for help, and in turning to drink, it made his character violent, and not the boy that she fell in love with, but she had that history between them and she couldn't turn her back on him, and she's a good person. And again, I think that's how so many people feel, that they want to make it work, they want to make them better, but as it proved for Sarah, sometimes it can be impossible to do that.
That was one of the things you made a point at the end of the book in your author notes. You mention about the mental health support. And I mean, anybody who has tried to access mental health support in the UK knows A, how hard it is if you're accessing it through the NHS, but B, how how scarce it is.
Absolutely, and I think particularly for soldiers, again, this is something I learnt from Rob, who, bless him, is currently doing a degree in psychology and training to be a therapist in PTSD because he wants to be able to help people and offer a service that he didn't have. And he explained it to me very clearly. He said, firstly, soldiers are the last kind of people who want to ask for help. They're the tough guy. They think that they can manage themselves. So that's the first problem. The second problem is that the NHS is absolutely deluged. It's hard to access services at the best of times. But when these soldiers do eventually go for help, they're absolutely at the last end. Some people may ask, at least ring their GP when they're beginning to suffer symptoms. These soldiers leave it and leave it and leave it till they're absolutely desperate. And it's in that final bit where the NHS doesn't have those resources to help them. That if they go to their old units or if they go to the army who do sort of have help, they tend to be based back in army barracks, and to just even have to go back into those buildings is very triggering for them. And I do think things are changing and getting better, but these guys have really struggled because there hasn't been specific help for them, and there are a number of great charities now, but to date, I think it's been very hard for these guys to access the right kind of help.
Yeah, speaking as somebody who has been part of the system, both as someone who worked in it, but also somebody who has sought help from it. The only way I actually managed to get on the list was having private healthcare, and that shouldn't be the way it is for
No,
anybody,
and
which
that's
is
definitely not
it's quite
something these
distressing.
exactly that, and that's something these guys can't afford, and it can take a while to get a diagnosis. As I say, the system is not really set up for helping them at all, so I'm really hoping that maybe we need to get this message out there. When you talk
Absolutely.
about a lot of the research that I did, and even before I started writing it, the one thing that really jumped out at me that was that in 2012, more soldiers took their own lives than were actually killed in combat in Afghanistan. And I've never been able to kind of get that fact out of my head, that they've come back, they've survived the war, but they don't survive coming home. And that can't be right. There has to be a way we can help these people,
That
these
isn't right.
kids.
It shows the deficit there is because automatically, I mean, you think about somebody finds out they're adopted, there is counseling available relatively quickly. And yes, that is a traumatic thing to go through. Grief counseling, when I lost my dad when I was 11, grief counseling didn't exist, not for children anyway.
Mhm.
So getting any help didn't happen. And it seems to be the same way with this kind of, if you're coming back from war, that should be something that is offered the minute you step off the ship or the plane.
You would really think so. And it's my grandfather's served in the First World War, and he came back. And there were stories of Grandpa going back to work, and then they never really explained what had happened to Grandpa. He'd gone back to the bricks work where he worked, and had some sort of breakdown, which was referred to in very much hushed, whispers.
They
And he
seem to
never
not even have a name for PTSD at that point, though.
but that's obviously, and it's only now that I put together that that's what he had. This He'd gone out there as a 16-year-old boy, seen terrible things, come back, and his whole life was sort of, basically done in his front room and in his garden. But nobody knew what it was. And I guess the Second World War, of course, it would have been exactly the same. Falklands, and now, and it's only now I think we're beginning to have these conversations about PTSD, talk about it out loud. That guys like Rob are out there trying to get the message out there and trying to help boys coming back suffering from it. But yeah, it feels like it's something that's never been discussed at
Yeah.
all, which is
You saying
extraordinary.
that reminds me, my great uncle, well, several of my great uncles fought in the Second World War. And one of them in particular, who we were very close to, he was actually a spy during the Second World War. And he had loads of medals, but you can't find any trace of any work he did during the Second World War. And he drank
Okay,
a lot. And that probably was his PTSD from all the things he'd done and all the things he'd seen. He travelled to Asia primarily. All of these things that he'd done and he'd seen during the war probably were coming out in his alcohol abuse.
yeah, I think that's very common. It's just a way to forget, to numb these experiences, because it was very much a generation where you pull yourself together. And also, they survived. They came back. I think there must have been this huge element of we're the lucky ones.
Yeah,
I don't want to complain. I don't want to make a fuss. But you still wake up in the middle of the night remembering these terrible things that you saw. And so alcohol, as in the book with Danny, becomes this way of numbing that, of being able to cope every day.
of blanking his mind of the memories of everything he saw,
Exactly.
especially during that one moment where they're they are essentially decimated,
Yeah,
because that's the start of everything, is when they go out on that particular journey and one of them doesn't come home and the rest of
exactly.
them.
And you see these terrible injuries being inflicted on people that they're your brothers out there. They're who you depend on for everything. You're living with them 24/7. And, I think there's bound to be this sort of huge emotional toll that takes on you.
I mean, it took a toll on me as a reader, and it was just so real. I think that's the thing, because you know that this is something that happens, and as you're getting to know all these characters and you're learning about their lives and how they are as people, and then all of a sudden everything changes.
Yeah,
And seeing the difference between 2008 in Afghanistan and 2011 in the UK, and how things have changed, yet they're still suffering the horrific effects of everything they saw in 2008, it really brings things home.
that felt important to me to show what it was like out there, because in so many movies and books traditionally that's where the story ends, that you've survived, or the end of this kind of huge battle scenes. But that really isn't. For so many of them, it's the beginning of this sort of war, literally this battle that they then go through to regain some kind of life back home.
Yeah, that's the thing. They fought a war and they come home and they're still fighting it.
Absolutely, but nobody thinks they are, or nobody understands that they are. And I think then that's very tough on them. And again, the main character, I think, does focus on people think he's lucky to be home, let's get on with life, but it really isn't that simple.
But I think he also tries to impress that upon himself. I
Absolutely.
survived. I saw my friends didn't survive it, and he doesn't want to focus on those other things for fear that they're going to pull him back in again. And it's
Exactly
kind
that
of
he
like
can.
that whole realization with Sarah and Danny that he has, and he tries to be noble about it, as though he's kind of doing her a favor.
I know. It's also kind of heartbreakingly warped, but from a kind of good place. Exactly that, he can't face it. Even looking at the scars that he has, he just doesn't want to go there. It's just too painful, and they're the physical scars, let alone the mental scars.
And the relationship that he builds with his tattooist Barry,
Uh-huh.
is, it's lovely, even though it's kind of, it's almost detached in some way, because we're focusing on him telling Barry the story as though he's us. In a
Yeah.
way, it feels like he's meant to be us.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's also, I think, sometimes things are so hard to talk about with people that you love. I think often in real life, I've found that sometimes with a stranger, we had the most amazing conversation before we started today.
We
So
did.
it can be the easiest person to talk to. And I think Carl very much found that he finds himself unburdening himself to Barry. And also there's an element of there's no eye contact when he's having the tattoo down his face down. And again, conversations with my children, sometimes the hardest ones have been in the car when you're not looking at them because you're driving, but they've told me things then. And I think again, he's in this room, but he's not making eye contact with Barry, and he finds that he's in a safe place and he can tell him in a way that he hasn't been able to tell anyone else.
And Barry is kind of like his therapist.
Exactly, exactly.
He's taking the role on of the person that should be there.
He does, and also, again, I researched tattoo artists, and they find themselves in very much this sort of spiritual counselling role often, because of course so many people have tattoos to commemorate somebody or something that happened in their life. So these guys, I think, are very used to um, people confiding in them and talking to them and wanting their help and how to make this memory stay with them.
And that was, I could envisage the poppies on his back in
Yeah,
that moment, because you can, especially, I think it was just such a beautiful way of remembering his friends. And obviously, you said that Rob has one of 7 poppies on his back for his for his friends who are no longer with us. And it is, given the fact that it has such a strong meaning to the armed forces, because of obviously the Somme, which is where it all comes from if you're not part of the UK. And it is one of those things that has such a strong meaning and such a strong visual effect to us, because
absolutely.
it
Well,
is this field of red.
indeed, and as I said right in the beginning, when I saw this article of Rob, and I couldn't literally take my eyes off the photograph of this tattoo that he'd had done. It was just the most poignant, beautiful sort of piece of art, and him talking about it, and the way he expressed himself, saying it was he wanted them with him, pushing him forward, not holding him back. It was, I took absolutely my cue from him, this extraordinary man who wanted no credit for what he'd done, but had been so brave and in his own way really commemorated these guys that he misses every single day.
That's the thing. They are, I mean, all of these people who Carl is commemorating, and obviously all the people that Rob is commemorating, are the unsung heroes. They are only going to be remembered by their family and their friends, despite the sacrifices they made on everybody's behalf.
That's right. I mean, we do remember them, every November, and we buy our poppies, and that is a wonderful thing. I always think it's a beautiful ceremony at the cenotaph, but then we go back to our lives. We're able to do that, and I don't think these guys are. So yeah, it felt important to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, and also to talk about the experiences that people have without support.
Yeah,
And that's one of the things that I took away from it, was we need to provide people with far more support, not only the people who have experienced it, but also the people who are supporting them. So their wives, their children, their parents, their
very,
friends.
very much so. I think it's for the wives and mothers. It must be so hard to come back, because also I think these guys are very adept at hiding it a lot of the time, unless it's an extreme case.
Yeah.
So it's in the middle of the night when they wake up and they're haunted by these dreams, or they find it hard to be close to people again or to trust people again. I think it must be really hard for the wives, and exactly that, they should be able to have help, because, and again, I think that the story arc of the book shows that when Carl does access help, he is able to get his life. Nothing's easy, it doesn't happen overnight, but you can get your life back on track. But it's about asking for that help, about the help being easier to access in the first place.
And that's one of the things I think is, he has done that, he's taken that step. And obviously, in the reverse, you've got Danny, who won't even accept help from Sarah and his mother.
Yeah.
He won't take his medication, and the only support that they're getting is, oh, well, give him these pills.
That's right. And that, again, is nobody's fault. The NHS is hugely
Yep.
overstretched. These are good people doing absolutely the best that they can. But it's not enough for so many of these people that are just left in the community and just simply cannot cope.
Yeah.
Um, and as you say, his mother, his wife, girlfriend, they're all doing what they can to help, but he just can't access the help that he really, really needs.
Yeah. That, I think that was the bit that really hurts, is the fact that it is such a repeated thing. You see so often the horrible stories of, they have turned, somebody who's come back from war has turned to alcohol in order to drown everything,
Yeah.
and they've ended up living on the streets.
Well, again, the many testimonies that I read, that wasn't uncommon. There'd been some heartbreaking story of some guy sleeping in a skip, and you just think, you walk past these homeless people and you never know the stories, but these are guys that, you may be walking past somebody who went out there who literally gave their life, put their life on the line for us, and it just feels heartbreaking to me that they're in
It
these
is.
dire situations back home.
That, I think that's it. But obviously we do have some happy stories, because
I
we
hope
have
so.
Jenny and Cherub, who
I love
are,
Jenny.
they are such an incredible pair, because Jenny, despite having experienced everything in Afghanistan the same as Sarah did, has come home, and her husband is, for all intent and purpose, whole. Well,
Yeah.
her partner is whole. They've got two mischievous young children, and they seem to have everything together. I mean, obviously, we don't know everything that goes on behind closed doors, but they are the ones that are there to support, knowing what happened.
Exactly that. And that is the flip side, that there are people, Cherub, who come home and are able to compartmentalize what happened out there and then to move forward. And he accessed a soldiers teachers training course, which did exist, and gets his life back together. Jenny goes back to work. But yeah, they have this family, and with love and with help and with support, if you know how to get it, you absolutely can. And I hope there is some good news in the book, that is possible. It's not always terrible for all of them.
No, that's it. With Jenny and Cherub, you have that moment, you realize that not everybody has it. I mean, everybody experienced the same things, but everyone is different. And we know that from everyday life, that we can all experience the same thing and react differently to it.
Definitely, and we all need a cherub, somebody who is there looking out. And again, I think, coming back to Rob, that's something that he has set himself up to be. He said that the soldiers who can't basically know there isn't help out there, but they set up, WhatsApp groups within themselves, and he will now, check in on people, and if somebody hasn't been online for a little bit, they'll contact whoever lives nearest to them to go round. So Cherub's almost this person that is looking out for the people when they get home, because that's how they've learned to manage, by setting up these groups and being there for one another.
And he felt kind of appropriately named as well.
I think so, yes.
That, I think that was it for me, with the way that Sarah obviously was unwilling to talk to anybody about all the things that had happened, as though she was ashamed of it, even
Which
with her colleagues
I think is very
and
much
with her friends.
the old-fashioned way of dealing with things, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think there's an element of, if I don't talk about it, if I don't mention it, it's not really happening. And then there's also the question of, if I talk about it, I'm betraying him. He never used to be this person. He would hate to think of me, you know, telling people that he'd been violent with me, that he'd done these awful things, because that never used to be him. So I think you're so caught up in mixed emotions of love and betrayal and hurt, and you just don't know how to tell people or what to say. As you say, even though she's a nurse, even though she's working in a hospital, it's still really hard, um, to get the right help.
And there was also that element of, this isn't really him,
Yes, that's right. So she,
which came across a lot.
I hope so, because I think that is the case, that people still see the person that they were, because that's who you want them to be again so desperately. And you think, certainly his mum, he'll be fine. He just needs to rest. He just needs to kind of, sleep in his own bed. But of course, it's much more complicated than that. And you have to be brave enough to say he isn't okay. He does need help. We do need to talk about this.
Yeah. I think it was almost as though Sarah, despite having experience of this kind of situation, because working in a hospital, you are more than likely going to have encountered it at some point,
Mm,
unfortunately. She is almost as though living in denial is going to change everything.
I
Or
think
if she
so.
ignores it, other people will forget it happened.
I think that's exactly it. And she's, she's a good person. She thinks this is how it's going to be for me. I will, this is life now, and I will just get on with it. I will go back to work, and she hopes that Danny will get better. But of course, he just can't, well, he
He
certainly
can't.
isn't.
Then it asks, obviously, there is that question, does he want to get help, or is he so stuck in the torment in his head that he can't see a way out of it? And
Yeah.
that I think for me was the biggest question with Danny, because you do get frustrated as a reader with a character who doesn't seem to want to do the best for themselves, but then you also have to think of the reverse of it with the, well, he doesn't want to do the best for himself, but maybe he can't see that there is an alternative.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the case. It's like all of these things, they are an illness actually, and it's so frustrating. But when you're so close to somebody and you think they won't help themselves and they won't get better, but of course that's the reality. They don't know how to. They're so far uh, gone into the black hole of their own suffering and pain that it's just impossible. It's much easier to just drink another bottle of vodka and make it all go away for another night.
Yeah,
Uh,
that I think that's the really sad thing about it, is the only escape seems to be the bottom of a bottle. And
yeah,
that seems to be the case for a lot of people who suffer from trauma.
I think absolutely in so many walks of life, in so many different sufferings from trauma, that is the way to deal with it. And who knows what gets you to that point? The stiff upper lip, the way you've been raised, but rather than dealing with it, I'm just going to bury it. I'm just going to, put my head in the sand. I'm going to drink this bottle of vodka, and we'll worry about this tomorrow. But of course, the demons are still there in the morning.
It's that whole be a man.
Very much so. And I think particularly for soldiers, as Rob said, these are the guys that they're the last ones that are going to want to ask for help. They're the macho, the heroes, the tough guy, they're portrayed in every film, in almost every film, in so many books. That's how we've always seen them. So for them to ask for help, I think, especially maybe from their mum or their wife, that must be a very hard thing to do. But I hope that is
That-
changing. I hope that even in Afghanistan, that was sort of, 2000 and 2000 now, and in time since, I think the world has moved on. I think we do accept that we talk more readily, I hope, about mental illnesses, about trauma, about accessing help. I do hope that slowly things are changing.
I think that's the hope. It's just, that's the thing. Things are changing, but the resources required for it haven't changed enough.
No, I think that's absolutely true. That's exactly
We
it.
haven't
So
kept,
many.
hasn't kept up.
No, I mean, so many of these, the poppy appeal, it's all charity. They're based on, that's how they're getting help. The help for heroes, the charities that are doing the bulk of this work, or certainly a huge part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the thing. You're required to have certain levels of psychoanalysis before you join up, or before you're deployed.
Mm.
Yet there's nothing available automatically when you get back, and that has always astounded me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely so.
It makes no sense. Oh, you have to check that they're okay before they go, but you don't have to check that things haven't changed when they get back.
Yeah, it seems extraordinary, doesn't it?
It really it perplexes me no end. Because it seems, to use a word that probably slightly inappropriate, insane.
I think it does. I mean, so much of it, it's like, okay, they're out of the army. They don't know how to get a home. So, a lot of them are living in squalor. That, and they don't talk about it. But yes, it's a brutal, brutal world, I think, for a lot of
Yes.
these kids, which they still are.
this has been what they trained for. This is all the qualification they've got. They don't know what to do afterwards, what job or anything. And though they are prepared for battle, they aren't prepared for life.
Exactly that, and all the characters I think in my book are lucky in the sense that there are people waiting for them back home who love them very much. Not even Carl, manages to meet people that are looking out for him. But the sort of heartbreaking truth is that there's lots of men out there that didn't have that didn't have the umbrella of love when they came home, and people looking out for them, or people that did but then have just become exasperated with them, and so they're out there on their own. And yeah, then I think it must be almost impossible to get
Yeah.
yourself back together.
That's the thing. Carl was, though obviously the circumstances around his coming home, they weren't exactly celebrated in glory, losing his best friend, and being so distant. The relationship with his mother is understandably disastrous,
Yeah,
given everything he'd been through. So he'd seen the whole alcoholic parent, alcoholic loved one thing from the other side.
yeah.
So it was almost as though I'm not going to turn into that.
No, I'm
But at the
not.
same time, he was isolating himself because he felt that shame. I came home and it should have been Fridge that came home because he's got a family. He didn't even meet his youngest child.
Yeah, but then
All
it's
of those
Fridge's
things.
dad who saves him. He's the one that
Yeah.
won't give up on him. So Fridge's another character I totally love, and his mother. They sort of won't give up on Carl. They keep going to help him. They keep, and they save. His dad saves Carl. Is generous
Yeah.
enough to save Carl.
That relationship between him and Mike, between Carl and Michael's lovely
Oh,
because it does show that he feels himself irredeemable, but
but
it
this
just
one
needs
guy.
somebody to believe in you.
Yeah, and the one guy who he thinks shouldn't love him
Yeah,
because of what's happened does, and just won't give up on him, and does save him. Yeah.
exactly. I think there are so many lovely relationships in here, but there's that balance of, well, there's a very, very destructive relationship, but on the other side of the coin, you've got this beautiful bond between a father who lost his son and another person who he treated like a son.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad that came across. I think in life there are so many relationships as we get older where awful things do happen and there are awful people, but there are also so many good people, so many people you meet along the way who help you in that moment that you really need them to, and are there for you. He didn't know Ros before, but he didn't know Maggie before, but you
No.
can put your faith in people and friendships, and they will be there.
And there was that scene when Maggie thinks she's being fired.
Yes.
That gave me a few chuckles, uh, because there'd been so much serious stuff coming before it, and then you have that moment with Maggie and Carl, and she's like, "You're going to fire me." She's so sure that that's what's going to happen, and I mean, they develop a lovely relationship,
Yeah, very
and
much. I think
and
sort of brother and sister.
yes,
I've got three lovely brothers, and I hope that that was the sort of relationship I tried to portray there. He can't quite believe his luck to have found her, and despite their grumbles with one another, they actually adore each other.
yeah, and obviously her mother Roz, and then you've got Jenny and Cherub who have got this beautiful bond together, but they
Mm.
also are a support network for their
Yeah,
friends.
yeah,
And then you've got obviously the less beautiful relationship between Danny and Sarah, which you always got the feeling that there was something there that wasn't quite going to work.
right.
I think partially because if Sarah had been incredibly in love with Danny, she wouldn't have connected with Carl in the first place.
I think that was sort of Sarah's dilemma, that when she gets out there, and you learn as the book goes on that things had changed so much for her, that this was a childhood romance, and she's grown into herself, and she's learned loves her career, and she's become very independent. So
Yeah.
while everyone assumes she's gone out there to be with him and has followed him out there, that's really not the case. And so if things had unravelled differently, there's very much the suggestion that she would have left Danny in good faith, that, she had outgrown him. He wasn't the boy, and neither she wasn't the girl that they had fallen in love together. But then these terrible things happen to Danny, and she just feels she can't walk away from him, that she, owes him more, should stay with him, and loves his mother. She's so tied up in this sort of relationship from back home, and things of the history of their relationship, that she feels she's unable to just to break away and start a
She's
new
kind of
life.
shackled.
Yeah, exactly that.
And I think this is a great way to show that it's relationships change. Not the
They
It's not a great way to show. It is a way of showing that relationships change. I wouldn't say that their relationship is good, or anything that happens to her when they get back is good, because it also shows the horrid side of an abusive relationship, where, as you
exactly
said, a
that.
woman can't feel like she can leave the
It,
person just in
exactly
case they
that.
change.
I think you're right. I think that there's two things there, that relationships do change, and it's okay to kind of say that out loud and walk away.
Yeah.
And it's certainly okay to say that if you're in an abusive relationship, to kind of, say, I don't have to put up with this. I don't, I shouldn't feel scared. You know, I don't have to stay. But as we all know, that's a hugely difficult thing to do in real life.
Yeah, which I think this shows that, because obviously it's a far more extreme than you're in an abusive relationship with someone you were in a relationship with when you were younger, and there was always that undercurrent. This was, I I feel like I owe it to him to stay and to try.
Absolutely, which makes it much more weighted, doesn't it? Much more sort of complicated.
Absolutely. It's The whole book is fantastically done, and I loved the introduction of Jobbo at Cherub and Jenny's wedding, and the discussion about how he changed so much.
Yeah.
That was really sad, because obviously he didn't necessarily know everything that had gone on in Afghanistan, which we aren't going to go into because that's a spoiler. But he, obviously, losing Caroline had such an impact on him,
Absolutely,
because he
and
was like the reverse of Danny and Sarah.
yes, yeah, just this fabulous relationship with everything, to live for, these excited plans for the future, that's just taken away from him, and he just isn't able to recover, isn't able to kind of move on with his life at all. It's too damaging, it's too much. So yeah, he comes home and throws himself back into the family business, but yeah, and the huge part of him is gone.
But he didn't seem to go to the same level as Danny.
No, and that of course is it. You cut so many men go through the same things out there, and some come back and are able to completely get on with their lives, um, with something missing or not, as in the case of Cherub, and some come back with the same loving relationship but aren't able to reconnect, that do then suffer, that then do um, have these terrible problems with alcohol and mental health issues. And I guess you get, as you say, you have these medical checks before you go out there, but you don't have any checks coming back, and who knows how any of these guys are going to go. It's impossible to read, and
Yeah,
to
I think
safeguard.
that's one of the horrible things about war in general, is we know that ultimately, I mean, there have been so many studies done, it does change you as a
Mm,
person,
mm,
because it's not something you tend to go through in your everyday life, watching television, going to your day job, coming home, making dinner, sitting down in front of the TV or with your family, and just doing the general normalities of everyday life.
mm.
It's not the same at all on any
No,
level.
absolutely not. So you're out there with these guys. You're 24/7, and they absolutely understand everything that you're going through. They totally get it, and then you come back and you're inevitably scattered. You all go back to your own lives, and as you say, the people in the supermarket, the people that you sit next to on the bus or in your job, they have no idea what you went through, and it must feel strange to kind of look at these people and going about their daily business and thinking, you have no idea. You have no
Yeah,
idea what we've been through, or what we've seen. You take it all for granted.
I think That's one of the things that this book does highlight, obviously, because there are people who haven't experienced what they experienced and they are interacting with them every day. And I think even Maggie says it at one point in the book. She says, I know that he was in Afghanistan, but I don't know what he went through.
Yeah. Uh,
And so she's kind of like that voice, the voice of every person who hasn't experienced it. She is that person.
yeah, and her mum, I guess, as well, because the mum remembers from her dad, and she says, he'll talk to you when he wants to, but don't push him. So yeah,
Yeah.
these two, exactly that. They know they're the voice of how hard it must be for him. You don't see the scars, but they're there.
Yeah, but she's also the us, in that
Yes,
she hasn't experienced it, because maybe she does remember her grandfather, but it's not the kind of thing you wouldn't have experienced it firsthand as the direct family.
yeah, exactly that. That's a very good way of putting it.
She's kind of not detached exactly, but she's removed from it.
Yeah,
But
and
I found that interesting because you got every element of you got every element. So you've got the person who won't have experienced anything like it. Then you've got the people who are experiencing it firsthand because their loved one has gone through it. And then you've got the people who survived it and are just carrying on with their everyday life.
yeah.
And I love that balance.
Oh, good. I mean, I did try hard to try and do that. I didn't want it. I want it to be something that everyone could relate to, because these men do come back and they do integrate back into the real world. So I didn't want it to just be an army book, or just even the relationship between Carl and Sarah. I wanted it to be much bigger than that. I wanted it to be a much bigger circle of how what happened impacts on so many lives.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, there was obviously the underlying romance or the love story, I'd say, rather than romance between Carl and Sarah. But at the same time, there is, as you said, there's so much more to it because we have their experiences built into that. But we also have the experiences of so many other people.
Yeah, and the rest of the people sort of, yeah, that I sort of loved as much. They kind of mattered to me as much, because it is all of these things like we've talked about. You come back and it's not just you; it's the children, it's the wives, it's the parents. It's always so much bigger of a picture than that. It's always not just the one
Absolutely.
person or the two people.
Well, I think that's important though. It makes for a more balanced story. When it's just those two people, we could have made it could have been so it was just concentrated completely on them, but it was more focusing on their experiences and their love story, and how everything works between them or doesn't is secondary to that.
Yeah, I hope so, because I think that's what makes a love story, isn't it? It is about those experiences. It is about the people around you, and as you see so much with Carl and Sarah, it's not just about those two people. And of course, it is when you close the door. But actually, getting to that point, there's so many other things around you, and that matters to me. I think the kind of the circles of life that surround you and make you.
Yeah. Because it could have easily been, oh, they met in Afghanistan and when they came back, everything was fine.
And I didn't want it to be like that, because it felt like I wouldn't be doing justice to Rob and to all these other people, because it's so tough. It's so not like that in real life, and I hope I've at least managed to. I can't, how can I possibly know? I can't possibly know what it is like for these guys, but I hope that I've touched on it sensitively, and read enough real life testimonies to know, to just know that it's tough,
Yeah.
and hopefully to get that message out there.
Exactly. How long did the book take you to write? You said that you first saw Rob's story in 2007. I'm guessing end of 2017, and
Yeah,
that's
and it
what,
took me
7 years ago.
yeah, a long time ago, and then it took me a while for the story to just sort of percolate, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to have a go at this, and then it probably. Then I got going, and then during lockdown, it was this sort of almost kind of made it easier for me, because the boys were at home. I wasn't having to worry about school runs. I was just able to kind of write and write and write. So it probably took um, 18 months to write the book, and then it took a long time to get a deal, to get it out there, and then there were the rewrites. I was really lucky to have an agent who was really invested in it, and then an amazing publisher at Penguin, Cleo, who are who has really made it better, who spent a long time with me, because initially actually it was much more Carl's story. That was how I always saw it, and then she saw it as Carl and Sarah's story, so it became sort of very different. So I
That's
guess
homework to
a year in
decide.
total to write it, but then a lot of versions of work on it after that.
And I
A
think
lot.
that seems to be the way with a lot of books now that are this kind of story. Rather, I mean, fantasy seems to be a totally different thing altogether. You can't turn around a corner without another fantasy. I'm looking at two that arrived last week. But with this kind of story, I know that on the front it says the new Nicholas Sparks. But as someone who wasn't a massive fan of Nicholas Sparks, I found this totally different. I think partially because it was based in the UK, but also because the characters were slightly older.
Right. Yeah. And again, I wanted it to be, I mean, I guess it's who I relate to more now. It's the characters are younger than I am, but I didn't want them to be just kids. I didn't want it to be a
Yeah.
really young romance. Um, I've lost my train of thoughts there, but yeah, so yeah, I wanted them to be a bit bigger, a bit more worldly, a bit older, a bit more experienced,
I
and
think
as you
that
said,
way
it
you've
took
got more
longer.
of an audience.
Yeah, I think you're right that with not being fantasy, you're very aware that you want to get this right. It went through, lots of people have read it, lots of people have proofread. I didn't want to make mistakes. I didn't want anyone to read this, so it wouldn't have happened like this. And I'm really offended by how this has been portrayed. So I was really, really conscious of that. But yeah, because it's sort of based on truth, I think it's harder than just when you're doing a fantasy, as you say, you can just sort of you're liberated to do that. I think there's more checks to be done with this. But I mean, at first I just thought, oh, it's because it's terrible. That's why I'm having to do all these kind of checks and rewrites. It's really bad book. But Claire's like, no, this is very normal to kind of do drafts and drafts. So, and actually, then I liked the comfort of the editing and working with Cleo. I found publishing in general to be this lovely, gentle world after the kind of the daily newspapers. The publishing, all the women that I've had the privilege of working with have been so kind and thoughtful, and it's been a very different world, a much gentler, nicer world.
I think that's the thing though, isn't it? With obviously you worked in the day-to-day busyness of journalism.
Mm.
So this is a massive contrast because the turnaround isn't quite so I need an article for tomorrow morning.
Absolutely. So this felt, and again, with an article, obviously everything has to be right. It has to be fact checked, and the lawyer goes over it. And this, like, oh, I can, and I know this is based on the truth, but I can just make this up. So that felt really liberating, and it felt so nice to just be in my room at my desk in my pajama bottoms, not having to sort of connect with the world. I got so lost in this and the research. It was such a lovely thing to do, although it was very harrowing for me as well. I mean, a lot of the material was so tough to go through and do, but it's I was ready to take a step back from the day-to-day world of journalism. I was really ready to do this. I've really loved being able to. I've been very lucky.
And obviously this is the first book, but I'm
Mm.
guessing if you're anything like numerous authors I've spoken with before, you've already got in your head, I know where I want to go next.
I have. I'm up to chapter 6 on the next one, and it's actually strange today coming back to college. It's been a joy to get back into it, but I have my head is now onto the next one, again based on a real story, and I'm busy on that one now.
But you'll have to go back to Carl again in January.
And I'm looking forward to it. I love
That's the
Carl.
thing, I think Carl and Sarah's story has been, as you said, it was harrowing. The entire experience was getting, obviously their love story is beautiful once you get past the horrific experiences they shared, because I mean the whole war experience, reading about it is horrifying, especially as I think about my nephew joining the army. um
I know,
but
terrifying.
it is terrifying, but at the same time it is an achievement. Without people like Carl and of Danny and Sarge and Asami and everybody else, we wouldn't be enjoying the kind of world that we have.
And exactly that, and that's what I kept coming back to with this book. That these guys are so brave. They literally risk everything. Sorry, and we owe them such a debt of gratitude, I think.
Absolutely. I
And
think
we
that,
deserve to remember that it's not over for them when they come home. They still battle. They still go through so much.
and it isn't just one day.
No, no, it really isn't. It's the rest of their lives.
I think that's one of the key things is while obviously we can wear a poppy for one day or a week in November, they are carrying that around with them like Carl with his tattoo for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, it's as you say, it's as his tattoo symbolizes. It's on them for the rest of their lives. They carry it with them always.
Yeah, which is something I think that a lot of us tend to forget.
Well, you just don't want to think about all of these things, do you? It is very harrowing. It is really awful to kind of confront a lot of it. You don't want to kind of read all of that. It's much nicer to think that, they come back and life is great for them again. But as with so many things in life, it's never that simple. It's never that easy.
No, life isn't easy.
No.
If it were, we'd all be millionaires, living in little great big houses with no bank debt.
But it isn't easy, and the older you get, the more you realise that, which again, you brilliantly picked up on it. It isn't two really young people; it's people that have been through lots. It's life isn't easy for them.
That's the thing, especially with Carl, he had a horrible childhood, as did Caroline, which is why they bonded.
Yeah,
And obviously, Sarah had it a little bit easier, though her father was very absent.
yeah,
And but I loved that moment in the book where she says, "I even bought my dad a Christmas present this year."
yeah. That she was ready to give him another chance. That he'd sort of,
Yeah,
that. And again, that's the big thing that people do terrible things, and families kind of argue and do dreadful things to one another, but there is a chance, if you're willing to kind of to try again, to forgive people.
yeah. And I think that this book is the epitome of moments of forgiveness amidst all the hardships that people experience, and these characters do go through quite a lot.
They do, and I'm sorry, it's a very harrowing, heartbreaking book, but I hope that also there is so much love and hope as well, um, in the book.
Yeah, I definitely think that one of the things I need to share below is a list of the charities that people can be sort of are probably peripheral awareness of.
Yes, yes, please do.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for talking about this book. It did make me cry a lot. As I said, it was this book and then another book that both made me sob. So I'm going to be trying to find something that makes me laugh
Something
next.
less grueling.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think that both of them being based on true life experiences made them harder to read
Yeah.
because of that. But at the same time, they were both worth reading.
Oh, good.
And yeah, this was definitely what it was one of those books. It's not a genre I tend to read very much. And reading it really opened my eyes to it made me think a lot about the things that, as you said, we tend not to focus on because otherwise everyday life is hard.
Yeah, no,
But
absolutely.
sometimes you have to think about them.
Yeah, yeah, and but hope that there is, even when things are awful, there is hope as well. There is hope
Yeah,
and love.
exactly. Well, that is Six Poppies by Lisa Cotter. Again, thank you so much, which comes out on the 30th of January in
Indeed.
2025. And yeah, it is a really good read. Very, very sad. But I think a lot of people are used to reading sad books now. I think it's one of the popular things, and uh, a lot of people love reading Nicholas Sparks because it makes them cry. So it's
Yes, God.
it's that's good, but it's also one of those books that really opens your mind to think of certain situations that maybe you haven't thought of in a while or haven't necessarily even been aware of.
No, well, thank you so much for reading it and for your such thoughtful analysis, and picking up so well on the themes that I've covered in the book. Thank you.
My pleasure. So, where can people find you if they want to follow you on social media, or do you have a website?
Embarrassingly, not at all, but I am definitely going to set something up because I'm sort of invisible at the moment, so I'm going to set up, and I will come back to you on that.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much. It really was a wonderful read, and I can't wait to see a lot more feedback on it in the future.
Thank you so much. It's been a real honour talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Things in Being Bookish will be back to their normal scheduled time and reviews from the next episode airing on the 10th of February. So get those bookmarks ready now. In the meantime, if you want to find out more about the podcast, you can follow me on Instagram at beingbookishpod, on X as being_bookish, and on Blue Sky as Being Bookish. You can also find my bookish videos and some archived episodes of the podcast on my YouTube channel at Ray Loves Reading, also found as at Being Bookish Pod on YouTube. And until next time, this is me saying farewell.